Can I be heard?
Yes.
Yeah. So just a little bit about our findings before we go on. We've not yet published the report, but we will be. So we had looked at how many people have access to bank accounts, and in the Mumbai metropolitan region, of course, the methodology is something that one can, discuss later. But we are seeing an average of around 65% people who have access to bank accounts. This is huge because if we are talking about direct bank transfers that need to be done, etc., this is a big concern. The other thing is there are only around 63% of the households who have access to ration cards. So what does that mean for food security in the region? What does it mean for areas that are not serviced? Areas and people who are not serviced by the public distribution system. The other thing with regards to construction work, because the Mumbai metropolitan region, especially Bombay, New Bombay, Thane, account for very high construction employment. And we see that there are only around 5.2% of construction workers reporting to be registered in the Board of Construction Workers, where they are supposedly going to be getting a 2,000 rupee benefit from the state. These are some of the findings we have. When we do come out with a full report, we'll organize another webinar. But just sort of to lay a brief context to what the situation looks like right now. And of course, we'll take questions afterwards. And I'll also, maybe if we have time, explain what Yuva's been doing through the Together We Can campaign in these different cities. But I don't think I should take more time. I'll now request Kamayani to start her presentation. I'll share my screen, and Kamayani, you can't unfortunately see her, but I will introduce you to her. So Kamayani is a Mumbai-based human rights activist and feminist. She specializes as a trainer in gender, health, and human rights. She has degrees in law, human rights, clinical psychology, and journalism. So that's Kamayani. She's also the convener of the Jan Swasthya Abhiyan, which is a people's campaign that looks at people's access to affordable healthcare. They have been very actively involved ever since the pandemic broke out, and have also filed a case in court, etc. So she'll be explaining that to us in a bit. So Kamayani, over to you. I'll share my screen.
Yeah. Thanks, Verena. Sorry, I have a very bad network, and I hope I'm audible to everybody.
Yeah. Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Jan Swasthya Abhiyan, actually, I just want to tell about Jan Swasthya. People are noticing now after pandemic, but we have been quite active for almost 2 decades now. And Jan Swasthya Abhiyan actually includes organization, individuals working in the field of health, and we have health academics, professionals, feminist organizations, service delivery networks, trade unions, and various people's movement. Right. So the campaigns and advocacy has been towards realizing the right to health and health care as a basic human right for people residing here. So this Bombay chapter has been doing that. Yeah, Marina, can I have the next slide?
Yeah.
So as Marina also is saying that the Bombay has become the epicenter, I would say it is like a COVID capital of India now. We don't have the next slide, Marina.
Yeah, sure.
So we, as it has reported, we have crossed the 1,000 mark. We have 1,026 of COVID-19 deaths, and 736 of these deaths have occurred in May alone. So one can wonder that the lockdown started in March and we are in May. So with the intention of the lockdown which the government has it really reached its target or not is again the question. And so we see that the highest rise has been in May, right? From the this is our 3rd lockdown, and now it seems it's going to be lockdown 5 as well happening. So the first death being reported in April, and then how we see that the graph has really escalated a lot. But I would like to, next slide, I would like you to go back to pre-COVID time also. Okay, what was the status of Bombay's healthcare then? you know. The data which is available, I mean, I was talking with Shishir, we do not have data. I mean, obviously the post-COVID data, but even the pre-COVID data is not that great. Marina, can I have the next slide? What has been the state of primary health care? Praja had done a study where it clearly indicated that 76% of OPD patients were actually visiting the public sector, the government hospitals, you know, and only 24% visited the government dispensaries. Now we have this National Urban Mission, like National Rural Mission, the National Urban Health Mission is there, but it is in a deep freezer. Now, according to the National Urban Health Mission, there should be one public dispensary for 15,000 people. But what are we having here in Bombay? It's one government dispensary for 64,468 people. And pre-COVID time, what were the main causes of death happening in Bombay? There was 26 deaths a day because of diabetes. Because of TB, there were 15 deaths a day. The heart attacks were 22, deaths a day. And what was the annual income? 9.7% of annual income was spent on medical costs in 2019, which is say around just close to 1 lakh rupees per household. So see, the health system was overburdened already, and this whole public-private partnership was actually working in the favor of the private hospital, which I call as 5-star hospitals, for which also JSA had filed a PIL that even in the charitable hospitals, where as per the law, the 20% beds should be reserved for the poor, right? But they were still on paper. So we have these big hospitals like Leelavati, you know. I mean, who would expect a small, a poor person, a slum level going to Leelavati hospital? And in fact, after that PIL, the hospital then had a social worker telling them that there is a law, and then that the beds around 20% and the OPD patients should be there. Next. So the PIL which we filed in the month of April, I mean, which we stated very clearly that the Maharashtra state was fighting a fire blindfolded. You know, our dear PM says, you know, ghanti bajao, thali bajao, and everything will disappear, you know, and, you know, we encourage the nurses and we praise the doctors for great work, you know, great warriors they have become. But what was this? It was the lack of proper and aggressive testing. There was no testing. So there was this full campaign which we had started where we were writing, we were approaching to the BMC commissioner. We also wrote to the chief minister about this, that then you need to have testing. Without testing, how can we know how can we access also of this whole pandemic, what it is? And then the Supreme Court had said that we are going to have free, these testing. The cost treatment would be free under the Ayushman Bharat scheme. Now, again, that is very problematic. As you said, you know, Marina, you were saying that how many people have ration card here? There are a lot of migrant workers, right? Again, within the Ayushman Bharat scheme also, there was specific ration card holder, orange hai, yellow hai, white hai, kya hai. But what about people who are poor, who don't have any? So they don't have any access to healthcare. And also there has been a failed, I mean, the partnership between public and private hospitals has failed totally. And because of the so much pressure, recently the government has decided to take over sort of private hospitals because they cannot afford, the beds are not there, you know. And also this whole hoopla about using, you know, hydroxychloroquine, the WHO in fact has just said today that they have stopped the clinical trials, but our great government is continuing. It's also, you have to see whether the medicine has actually helped or whether that medicine is actually killing. Again, we have no data on that. There is no experiment. So if the WHO is saying, why is our government still insisting on doing that? So basically, there is no coordination between the Indian Council of Medical Research, the central bodies, the state government, and the central government. Can I have the next slide? So also Shishir, I was talking to you just before, what is the status of non-COVID healthcare? Now, the picture you see, the picture you see is of the Hind Mata flyover, where KEM closed their OPD for the COVID-19 patients, and you had all these patients, below the Hind Mata flyover. And I mean, the government in this state of affairs, they were women, they were children, they could not find any good infrastructure like maybe colleges, hostels, hotels, and when this came out in media, and again then they were given. So the government has been working on afterthought. There was no planning. I mean, there was absolutely no planning. And even in non-COVID-19 healthcare, what JSA has been receiving, the TB patients, the cancer patients, where will they go? The pregnant women. I mean, the pregnant women were denied delivery. There were cases reported where traditional birth attendants gave birth, So where will they go? And also the abortion services. So the abortion services won't be essential services, is it? Again, the whole issue of gender also comes when you, what are you calling as essential health service? Then what about our frontline workers? What our PIL said, because we have a group of where we have nurses federations, where we have trade unions. Now the plight of nurses is worse. I mean, now it is coming out in open, but like say one and a half month back, it was all hush hush. I mean, even the nurses who were tested positive, there were no guidelines where they are going to be quarantined, where they are going to be isolated, what is going to be a support system for them. And imagine, when you're wearing that PPE gear, first of all, PPE gear was not there, and now when it is there, again, the issue of quality is being talked about. Today, there were reports like, it is like, I am having a plastic bag or a rice bag. No, these women are wearing PPE, yeah? The women who are going through menstruation, they can't even go to relieve themselves. They have to wear it for 7 to 8 hours together. What type of diseases they are developing? Have you thought about it? Have you thought about that as a support mechanism? No, there is dehydration. There are skin rashes, and also the nurses have not been included in decision making. In fact, recently there was this reported death of a nurse from Kerala in Delhi, and where now the nurses are speaking that PPE, the used masks were given to the nurses and the unused were given to the doctor, because according to doctors, they are more vulnerable, compared to nurses, which is actually so ridiculous. And then also we talked about the quarantine centers. I mean, all of you must have seen, the videos going viral, how pathetic states our quarantine centers have been, and they were not ready also to do that. And even the private hospitals were not. Now slowly they have become, and now just 2-3 days back, there have been a big list of, the big quarantine centers we are having. Next. And also in Bombay, we see we cannot talk without the Dharavi, which is the largest slum. I mean, I'm in the area of 2 kilometers. We have like 7 lakh people. The first COVID case was in Dharavi was reported on April 1st. There were almost 100 positive cases by April 15, and till date it is 1500 cases. Right now, recently there has been a report today, the doubling effect come from 3 days to 19 days. Now, whether that is an accurate way of verifying are the cases going down or not. What we had been talking in our PIL for 1.5 months ago to involve the community, now the government has done. So now you have more than 2,400 healthcare workers which are posted in Dharavi, including 27 private doctors, nurses, and ward boys. Yeah. Next. So, I mean, stopping the spread is not a rocket science. What we had to do is we had to find the contact tracing. The contact tracing cases should have been found quickly, and so that they could have been isolated and the spread had been reduced. Recently, government is, has come up with Arogya Setu app, something like, again, a big surveillance app, which actually now even Google and Apple are saying that they are not going to, support it, because my right to privacy is infringed upon, because it takes all my data. There have been contracts, tracing apps in South Korea, Australia and all, in which the data disappears within 15 days. But our great government has gone ahead with it. And that particular app also has the private pharmacies, for the ads and all. But do we think that before the Arogya Setu app came up, there was nothing, we didn't have any model? We all know about the Kerala model, you know. How in January only the Kerala health ministers had actually had a meeting and they started working on it immediately. But close to home, next. Recently, the Maharashtra Public Health Analysis Group has done a study. Okay, in that study, now I don't know how many people know that in Maharashtra, Islampur town in Sangli district has created a model to control of spread of COVID-19 despite a last spurt of initial cases demonstrated importance of intensive community-based strategy. Again, I say community-based strategy. So there were these 4 members of family which returned from Iran who were positive, and 26 cases were detected by March 23. Following this, all contacts were traced. Symptomatic contacts were put in isolation, while asymptomatic contacts were put in institutional quarantine. A 1 kilometer radius containment zone was created with sealing of entry and exit points, and home delivery of essential items was ensured. You know, this is the most important thing. Why do people say, "Arey, you know, they are not sitting, they are not isolating, they are all going out"? But are we giving them the support system? No, we are not. So hence, how can people who are poor, I mean, how can you expect people in Dharavi and slums, other slums and other satellite towns to, you know, do physical distancing when the space is not there and when the support system is also not there? So actually, this has led to an effective containment with recovery of earlier cases and no further cases. So why could not we learn for something from our home also? Why was not this implemented by our government? You know, so this JSA has come out, you know, we say vaccine jab banega, but there has to be a social vaccine, you know, like how are we going to spread our message? So these are the posters which Jan Swasthya Abhiyan has come up, which is being translated in various languages on how a community quarantine needs to be done. And it is very important if you have to change the social behavior, our social messaging, it has to be very important how it is. Yeah. Next. Last but not the least, I would like to talk about you know, now we all say we are in prison, but do we really talk about prison? You know, do we, what is happening to prisoners? Now in Mumbai's Arthur Road prison, there are 184 COVID-19 patients and there are 2,500 inmates there. So the question of isolating and physical distancing is just out there now. So what the government said, okay, so we will go to the Eversmile complex at Mahul. I hope you all know Mahul. I mean, it has been in news, the Mumbai toxic hell. With great initiative, people have you know been displaced from there and given other suitable housing, and it's a breeding ground for asthma and TB. Again, there had to be an intervention by Ghar Bachao Ghar Banao Andolan. That you cannot make Mahul, which is already a toxic hell, a quarantine center. You know, so basically, in the end, I would just like to say that Mumbai has missed the first bus in COVID-19, but let us not miss the second bus, which could be the last one. The lockdown accompanied by physical distancing and symptom-based surveillance is the only way we can see how the transmission is to be done, and there has to be an implementation of a comprehensive COVID-19 testing and intensive strategy should be there. Involvement of civil society and the people itself is very important. Kerala had come up with a responsive lockdown reversal strategy, and I think it's high time we also talk about that. So, you know, COVID-19 didn't break the health system. I feel it just exposed a broken system. You know, there are many other things we will talk in question and answers later. Thank you.
Thanks, Amyani. I think you brought out some very important points. One, I think some of them were also, I mean, it applies to the whole of India, especially the Ayushman Bharat questions and how many people have access to affordable healthcare. But and also thanks for bringing up the Islampur case, because actually I don't know how many people have heard about it and how they were able to effectively manage the situation. Just one thing, I mean, because we're for the Mumbai metropolitan region and you brought up Dharavi, I mean, I think of course cases in Dharavi are increasing, etc., etc. But I mean, there are many slums like Dharavi that are as big
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
Bombay region that somehow gets lost in conversation. And also, very often people forget about places like Nalasopara, which is in Vasai Virar Municipal Corporation, where slums are almost
Yeah.
as in terms of area and density. So, I mean, when we talk about a metropolitan region, I think also preventing another Dharavi from happening is as important. So, we should also maybe in the discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree on that. Yeah.
Okay, so with that, I call upon our next speaker, Shishir Joshi. So I'll just end one second. Give me a minute. Let me end this presentation. Yeah. Hi Shishir. Shishir is the founder and chief executive of Project Mumbai. And Project Mumbai has been very much involved in relief work since the lockdown. They have done multiple things. In fact, not just provide dry ration, etc. They have a lot of interventions with the BMC, looking at helpline numbers, looking at mental health, etc. So I request Shishu to share some of the work that you're doing and also your perspectives, because you work in the MMR for many years, and I know you'll have some fascinating insights about that too.
Yes, thanks, Marita. It was, in fact, Kavani, your presentation is really very insightful. And post this, I'm going to borrow that as well, because I'd like to spend some time going through some of the data, which is really very critical. Just I'll spend a couple of minutes on what we'll be doing to give a scale of the gaps which exist. I'm not here to complain right now because there's not much that one can do. Because so what we're doing now is we started off much before the quarantine, the lockdown began, and all these areas is where we should have seen the local administration or the state administration step in. People who were coming from abroad, so we failed on stopping people from coming in from the Middle East, whatever that reason could be. So people who were home quarantined were never really mapped. They were traveling out, so gradual spread was happening. We started servicing them with groceries. We started mental health helplines, Marina, as you pointed out. We have 3 helplines now for people with special needs as well. We are also taking care of senior citizens living alone. And that's a huge space in Bombay who are not cared for even otherwise. Forget a COVID scenario that we're facing. We also looked at healthcare infrastructure in the PPE space, and stories are limitless in that. Apart from the corruption, apart from the quality, Kamani, you mentioned the used kits or masks that are going around. We donated, possibly, not possibly, I think surely the country's largest PPE kit donation. 2 lakh PPE kits was donated through Project Mumbai, 200,000 and 10,000 to the Mumbai police. Okay, and then we realized that the huge gap, because Mumbai Municipal Corporation, these so many things we would not know, is the PPE kits to Bombay only go to the BMC hospital. What about the state government hospitals? What about the private hospitals? They are getting a very trickle flow. And these kits go to mainline doctors who are going to the isolation wards. What about the healthcare workers at the second level and third level who are helping patients out of ambulances? Are they not as important? So that was one gap. We also looked at providing food to doctors. Again, it's a gap. Where is the state when providing, you're talking about thali vajao for the doctors. What about the same thali providing food to the doctors? Why is the Project Mumbai providing 2,000 meals every day are being provided to JJ Kama, KEM, Science, the Mansalai control room where the political headquarters is or the state headquarters is. So, and then now we are looking at those gaps of non-COVID, because again, the point here is we are expecting a child with no motor skills to run. And that's what the municipal corporation currently is. So it's 2 parts to it. And I'd for a moment like to play the role of a PR for BMC. I was actively involved in the earliest stages when the crisis began, and the remarkable speed with which the municipal corporation got into play in getting all stakeholders involved. On the healthcare front, we may complain that do we have enough hospitals and do we have enough health infrastructure? But despite those constraints, so why don't we have is a separate chapter, but how did within the limited infrastructure, the state machinery, the city machinery has come forward, got all stakeholders involved and allocated resources. And this I'm talking about the the 16th or the 17th of March, when all the hospitals came together and the commissioner said, tell me what all you can do right now. We want all the resources. Since then, have we been able to cope with it? Since then, there is a political drama that's happening. Since then, there is a political machinery which is playing stupid games out there. The city also always lacked governance. Now, we completely forget the fact that while we have a new government in Maharashtra, which is the Shiv Sena, which is maybe 6-8 months old, but the same Shiv Sena has been ruling Mumbai for the last 25 years. What have they been doing in building? So we can't have that argument from them to say, the city is new or the crisis is new. It was so obvious to have infrastructure. We cannot have an infrastructure to combat a crisis. Crisis is an exception. 2611 was an exception. But yet we cope. This is 10 times of 2611 and it's an invisible enemy. But do we have an SOP in place? And if a UA or if Kamayani or if Project Mumbai or organizations can have plans put together and are implemented, surely IAS officers or the government, which has so much more public experience, would have put things together. But we don't have those things, and which is where the municipal corporation is like. I'll give you a simple example on data. And I wonder why they are so fearful. Every night there is a WhatsApp group, and for all you know, if one of them is listening onto this chat right now, these IAS officers will throw me out of that WhatsApp group tonight. That this WhatsApp group has all the main doctors, has all the key IAS officers, and every day without fail, and it has some of these ministers also. Okay, 10:30 to 3 in the morning, messages go on. Patient, 65-year-old, Kandivli, needs a bed. Then the message comes in. Half an hour later, same reminder, and the reminder is from nothing less than a CEO level of a hospital. The patient has now been brought to my hospital, which could be Marol, for instance, 7 Hills. I'm giving an example right now. And then the same patient waiting for 1 hour in ambulance, is bed available? Somebody says no. Okay, can you check bleach candy? Can you check whatever? It's almost like some bhaji market going on. And then the patient is moved to somewhere in Ghatkopar. It's 6 in the morning. And then the patient is moved to NSCI, which is in Worli. It is 8 in the morning. And then finally at 2 in the afternoon, somewhere the patient finds space, either in the bed here, or then he finds space upstairs, which is in heaven. Okay? And these stories are often taking place. Why could we not have a dashboard which is live, which is accessible? The moment I have a family member who tests positive, I can go onto the dashboard and say, these are the 30, 40 hospitals in Bombay. This is the state of beds. There are 4 beds available here, 3 there. Let me go to this place. No, but we like to cover our follies, and in the pretext of that, we are saying that no data. Reach out to 1916, and there are a handful of people handling that 1916. Our people are really doing a lot of hard work. Okay, these people under the available resources. But why should they be doing something like this when we could have done so much more better? Except for healthcare management, everywhere else we failed. Food management, Marina, you asked me about MMR also. We don't have a facility for healthcare outside of Mumbai. Thane, Dombivli, Kalyan, wherever you go, and we're talking about cases, somebody is positive, the patient has to be wheeled out through ambulances from there out here to Bombay, and then the Bombay hospitals are asking, the patient is not from Bombay, am I allowed to admit him? Can't get more ridiculous in a state like this, where we are talking about, can we admit a patient? And we are talking about basic level. So Kamani, you mentioned that, we need to have a larger framework, policies. Can we get just the basics right? Now, what about non-COVID? Where is the administration saying all hospitals need to remain open for basic infrastructure? What if somebody has a fracture? What if there's a pregnant woman who wants to deliver a child? What does she do? Is there some mechanism? We started a mental health helpline because we realized that people need help. The state government helpline, and it was on the 19th of April, the Chief Minister announced it. In the first 20 minutes, we had close to 700 calls. Okay. And by evening, we had a few thousand calls on that helpline. 90% of the helpline calls were for food. Where do we get food? That was 19th of April. We've crossed 19th of May. Has the challenge changed? No, it's not. Confusion still remains. Today, I could ask any one of you here or any one of the 40, 100 people listening and watching in to say, what's the Mumbai police helpline or what's the police helpline? We'll all say 100. Ask anybody, name the helpline in your district, in your city, where you can get information on COVID hospitals. You won't know. On healthcare, you won't know. On state administration, you won't know because it doesn't exist. And what does it take to put up something as similar as ask a management student, ask a graduate from any college, and he'll put a SOP in a place like this to say, have a call center, set up 30, 40, 50 students and take care. Why is the non-profit sector coming up with solutions? The same non-profit sector which has always been last out at, always been the target. And the fact that the bigger worry, Marina, is we've all put in all our resources in the last 2 months, and we'll be squeezing ourselves dry in the next 3 months as well. The corporates which are funding us and giving us the energy will also run out of resources. After that, the government will be back to its, hopefully that the COVID crisis ends and the government will be back to its absence of governance mechanism, and we'll be the one trying to survive. And so many of us may not survive this crisis. And then what happens? Because if the next calamity strikes, then this non-profit sector, 80% of the country's food needs, today we were talking about earlier, Arun mentioned from Aknala, that are being taken care of by the non-profit sector. Where are they going to come in from? So problems do exist. What is needed now is to have, there's a now plan and there's a tomorrow plan. It's easy to be confrontationist. I'm not one. It's important to be collaborative. Because no point in it's cliched, but yes, we get what we deserve. But now it's important that it's survival for all of us. There was a time, Kamini, you mentioned the first death in Dharavi in April and so on. We used to hear a case which was in some other suburb. Then gradually we started hearing closer home. And now there are cases either in our building or in our vicinity or somebody in our very close circle. So it's gradually inching up closer to us. And, that's the frightening part. Are we ready? Yes, the lockdown is important. The 5 areas critical in a crisis. One is health management. Have we succeeded? We need to ask. Second is communication. Has the state succeeded in communicating when it should have, the way it should have? No, it's not. Third is food supplies. Has it managed to do anything on food supplies? No, it has not. Fourth is migrants and their movement. Has it succeeded in doing anything on that? No, it has not. Fifth is transport. Has it done anything on ensuring that people's movement and access is understood, helped, and supported? No, it's not. So 18 out of 100, definitely by no math, by no education standards, is a pass. Moving is what do we do about it? I think it's important that, and this is a discussion that while we keep having, and we are all to blame as well somewhere, that we also keep talking and we also live in our silos, the non-profits. It's important that the non-profits, which are currently valued because we're doing their job, we need to pull down these silos and say, listen, let's get together and raise our voice. A point differently put is, can we take a confrontational stand to say food is expected of all of us? And Marina, you guys are doing phenomenally well in different areas, in the MMR also providing food kits and so on. If we decide to say we won't give food kits, now the point is we can't be so heartless, but we provide the food kits. The government is smiling like fat cats. The local elected MLAs are passing on those lists to us. We provide the food kits. They go back to their electorate and say the food kits have come from us, which is them. And 1.5 years later, Mumbai Municipal Corporation goes in for elections again, and these guys get elected, and we are back to square one. So can we get together, make a more consolidated stand, make people also aware that this is what high time we all speak up. We're anyway on the brink of a medical war and a crisis. We're also on the brink of a civil unrest right now. What we've seen in the migrant situation has been a civil unrest of the worst kind. The last space that we need to look at is from a futuristic point of view. What are we doing next? are we in a position to think 2 days later, 3 days later, 3 months later? And that's one space I'd like to share, that we are at Project Mumbai, we are putting together an education plan because education needs to continue. We're putting together an education plan. We've shared it with the government now because the government has, I personally believe, is not capable of thinking on those lines. How should children study? Do they have access? What kind of education platforms that need to be created? Second is, of course, healthcare. Third is transport, and we have people like Prachi Merchant and Ashok Datar, who are part of the larger network of urban planners who are helping us put together a transport plan. And fourth is entertainment industry, which is also a large migrant population, which helped us survive. It's also revenue. It's also bringing entertainment into education, creating more entertaining mechanisms of educating people and children. So those are areas we need to think of. But more important is we need to get together and ensure that the voice is common and heard out by different people. Back to you, Marina.
Thanks a lot, Shishir. I think the future plan that you were talking about, that you all are working on, education, health, transport, sports and entertainment, they are all regional concerns. And actually, we have Uma Artsumili, who's the chief regional planner from the MMRDA, who's listening in. I think maybe Uma, if you don't mind, we'd like to get you on maybe after Parth speaks to share some of your thoughts, because Uma has been one of the people who was part of the regional plan for the MMR, and I think it would be interesting to have her thoughts on the healthcare system in the.
I don't mind saying one of the most finest officers that I've met. Uma, happy to have you here as well.
Yeah, so Uma, I hope you don't mind if we include you include you to speak after Parth does. Okay, so Parth, over to you. And Parth has been reporting extensively through the lockdown on different issues. Parth is an independent journalist. He writes with multiple media houses, with the LA Times, with First Post, Quint, Catch News, and he's also actively involved with PARI. And Parth, we are glad to have you here. Just very recently, I know you were in Vasai looking at the migrant crisis there. So hope to have you share some of your experiences from on ground.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Well, the bar has been set quite high by Shishir and Kamyani, so I'll try and live up to that expectations. But you know, while traveling through the ground, meeting migrant workers, especially urban poor who live in Mumbai, and the ones who are trying to get back to their villages, you see a sort of a mismanagement, apathy, and absolute lack of any planning on multiple levels. So first of all, if you look at the government and the way they planned the lockdown, you don't give a nation of 1.3 billion people 4 hours to shut their lives. Suddenly it spread panic, and that's what Shishir was also speaking about when he spoke about the lack of communication. There was absolutely no communication. It spread panic among people, and these are the people who basically you ask them to sit at home for months or weeks, and they can't even sustain without work for like 3 or 4 days, because they work during the day, they make their ends meet with daily wage work, and there was absolutely no planning as to how we are going to look after them at the time of a pandemic, and those who absolutely don't have any kind of safety net. So that's one. Secondly, if you look at the way we were planning, I mean, when the people stuck abroad were coming back or trying to come back, we converted our 5-star hotels into isolation wards and quarantine centers. At the same time, we could have converted our schools, colleges, marriage halls, and community centers into shelter homes for the migrant workers who are trying to get back home. That way, we could have also, it would have been easier to reach out to them with relief measures. But that didn't happen. They were, they were under one bridge today, the second bridge tomorrow, on the third highway the next day, and that made it very difficult for people who wanted to reach out to them. It made it difficult for them to reach out to them. So that's the second part. Thirdly, I think even among those who live in Mumbai, there was absolutely no responsibility shown towards the urban poor by the upper middle class and urban middle class. I mean, I traveled through a lot of slum areas, Dharavi, Kurla, Goregaon, and elsewhere, and most of the people who worked as domestic helps in these high rises, they were sent on unpaid leaves. The urban middle class, the upper middle class, basically that was the first uh, that sort of very happily banged plates from their balconies had left their domestic workers in lurch, and that also helped. That also made it difficult for the non-profit organizations to reach out to them, because I mean, at the end of the day, the non-profit organizations can only do as much, and if only the upper middle class and urban middle class had taken responsibility of their own domestic helps, the non-profit organizations could have just focused on the migrant workers and the homeless, and no, instead now what happened was they were spread a little too thin because they had to cover up a huge constituency. So that was the third, and lastly, I mean, the third point is that there's also this apathy by the media. I mean, at the end of the day, the migrant we have been covering migrant workers since the lockdown, but we have spoken more about migrant workers in the past 2 months than we did in the past 10 years. Uh, if you look at the condition of migrant workers before the lockdown, they didn't exactly live in palaces. They were exploited by their employers even before that. They lived in appalling conditions. But we didn't find enough time to talk about them because they provided cheap labor for rich people in cities. Uh, so basically, what we need to do going forward is that even while we cover migrant workers, we have to look at it in some context, and that context is that of rural distress. We have smashed agriculture. We have made some of their crafts absolutely irrelevant, and that's what has compelled them to come to cities and work as construction workers for 300 rupees a day. I think we need to look at going forward. We need to look at rural infrastructure and rural economy to a large extent if we want to even out the equation between rural India and urban India. Many of the people are now wondering if they'd come back to cities or no. I mean they will, because we've taken away their livelihoods long back from rural India. So I think we need to look at that as well. Just few days back, I was in Vasai. The mismanagement that we saw was, I mean, it's colossal. I mean, what's happening right now is that, I mean, from Vasai, there are 17 trains left to different states. I don't know if they reached the destination states, because many of the trains are reaching UP bound trains are reaching Orissa, and Bihar bound trains are reaching Karnataka. So that's another thing. I mean, you just had a migrant worker who died on a Shramik train because he didn't get food or water for 60 hours. So that's another level of mismanagement. But just in terms of how many people we have managed to send back, just the number of people who have been gathering at the salt pan land of Vasai in the hope of catching a train, it's heartbreaking. You see, so what's happening basically is that for the migrant workers to get back home, they have to fill a form, submit details to their police stations, and then wait for a call. Now that the fact is that the police station do not provide any timeline. So even after they register, they keep looking for alternative modes of transport, and they have taken up some they've taken up some serious risks in order to get back home. They have traveled in cramped trucks, paid 3,000, 4,000 bucks just to get back home. They have bought bicycles. They are riding back to Orissa and UP on their bicycles. Some of them are going back home on their in their auto rickshaws. Some of them are obviously walking. I also met someone who had lost his leg in 2012, and he was riding back his Activa with a three-year-old daughter and wife, and he was riding 1,200 kilometers back home to a village in Madhya Pradesh. So these are the kind of risks people have taken. These are the kind of risks we have compelled them to take, and that is something that we need to be ashamed of, I think. So to come back to Vasai, basically, so what's happening is people are leaving after registering. So there's a lot of chaos that's happening because once the list comes back to the police station, they make a list of 1500, 1600 people who are supposed to board the train, and say 500 or 700 of them have already left because they got restless, or they couldn't wait for the they couldn't wait for the police to get back to them. Now what's happening is the police want to fill up the remaining seats, and they are doing that with by calling under those who have not registered and those who have turned up at the ground in Masai. Now the problem is that you are filling up 500 seats and there are 5,000 people who have turned up. They have given up their homes, they have given up their rented homes, and now they have nowhere else to go if they don't get on a train. So it's just a colossal humanitarian crisis that could have easily been avoided if we had just given them a bit more time, if we had just planned a bit more. Because I thought there was absolutely no planning, no consideration of those who are going to be most affected by the lockdown. So I think these are things that we need to look at going forward, and it's absolutely heartbreaking to cover these stories day in, day out. I mean, there was one story that I encountered from a migrant worker in Wadala. He was supposed to board the train from CST. He got a call that told him to board the train from LTT. He ended up going to the wrong station and he missed the train. When I called the number that gave him wrong information, that number took me to an NGO in MP that was working with the MP government. So these are basically some of the issues that's just schoolboy errors, and this absolute colossal waste of time and energy behind all of these things. We could have just planned it better, made sure that they got back home and then enforced the lockdown. It would have been far better, because at the end of the day, if you look at the people, if you look at your urban settlements, urban or metropolis may provide economic opportunities to people, but they don't provide social security, and that's what has made them desperate to go back home. And I don't think we took that into account at all. So I mean, yeah, I just hope that the crisis that started 2 months back, it's still unfolding, and we have still not managed to get a grip on it, and it reflects poorly on us as society and as and the government, to be honest. Back to you.
Thanks, Parth. I mean, the migrant crisis is really stark in the region, because whether it is Bombay that attracts such a huge migrant worker population, they are also, working on construction sites in Thane, in Panvel, where you see these regions developing so rapidly. You have the power loom workers in Bhiwandi, the number of small and medium industries all across the region, and I mean, it's so important to be speaking about the migrant worker issue in the region right now. So thanks for that. Okay, I'm Uma. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to unmute you, and if you have any thoughts or you want to share something, we'd be really happy to have your sharing here. Uma, are you there? I've unmuted you. Okay.
Marina, if I could just add a point.
Yeah.
It also boils down to, while we've all been talking about Kamini and Parth, and you also raised the issue of governance, which has been grossly urban governance, which is lacking, missing, exposed is the other way of putting it. Classically, even Mumbai as a city, and this reflects across the state. If you have a state capital being handled the way it is, it's, as we've always classically said, it's an orchestra without a conductor. We've got 18, 19 institutions which are running Mumbai alone. And in a scenario like this, then you have, in the middle of a fast moving car, you're changing the driver. When you have a commissioner being changed in high speed train, who's driving, what are the signals that you're trying to give out? How are you going to expect officers, good or bad, to even perform? Because nobody wants to then get into the radar stick their neck out because God knows what's going to happen next. What you need at this point is continuity so that somebody who has a plan, help them with the plan rather than pull them out. I'm not talking about official competencies. I'm just talking about processes. You know, smaller things which could have easily been handled in a much better manner. Parth spoke about the migrant crisis. We've all been speaking, but something very simple. What takes us in organizing trains? Why would organizations like ours organize trains? And take it one simple example, and Parth gave that example about LTT and CST crisis. We organized a train for 1,600 migrants who had to go back to Tamil Nadu. And they were waiting. Even as we speak, I've been getting this call from somebody in Chembur. For the last 40 days, he's been writing to the police station there to say when, and the cops keep saying, come back tomorrow, abhi malum nahi, agle mahine dekhenge, jo bhi hai. These 1,600 people from Tamil Nadu, we kept speaking to so many officers in Tamil Nadu. We spoke to officers in Mumbai. And then finally, in the morning, one day we said, okay, the train's going in, the train leaving in the evening. Why do suddenly trains come up from somewhere? You know, obviously you can't have trains coming out of people's pockets. And the trains leaving from CST at 8:30. So these are people, 800 of them waiting in Nalasopara. Then buses are organized for them to get themselves medically checked. 8:30 train in the evening, so they're all rushing. Is there any provision plan thinking done for them? And then at 5 o'clock, they're told that no, the train doesn't leave CST, it's going to leave from LTT, which is Kurla. So directions change and people go to Kurla and then they board the train. It's just kind of a classic stupidity bundles that are happening, which is completely not expected. It's criminal more than anything.
I just wanted to say, I just wanted to say what Parth said was so correct. And I'm just wondering if there were elections right now, all these migrants might have even flown and gotten 80 buses just because election is not there. And I think this is going to be a big issue. Now, healthcare has never been politicized ever. It has never gained any political recognition. But after this, I mean, I'm quite sure the migrants are neither going to forget and nor forgive, I mean, the state for the hunger and humiliation. You know, there is no dignity. The way migrants have been treated, you know, murga bano, or have been thrown out for not following physical distancing. I mean, it is horrible. And what Parth obviously has experience. I'm also a volunteer with the project, this lockdown helpline, you know. And we have been getting calls like BMC recently said they are going to give ration kits also. All the NGOs and civil society has been doing that. Jo bhi khana they are giving, the cooked is like, I mean, it's the horrible khichdi they are giving. And that also creates, again, you know, the whole issue of infection and physical distance. This is the time to really now, you know, they should open. And it's also the interstate coordination, which is not there. Buses are going, unko वापस भेज रहे हैं, हम उनको नहीं रखेंगे, आप वापस आओ. I mean, are these people, I mean, who are these people? Are they guinea pigs or what? I mean, that's how the state is treating them.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
1 minute, can I just stop you? I think Uma can speak now. We've made her a panelist. Just give me a minute. We can get her in. Uma, we've made you a panelist and turned your mic on. If you have anything, if you can hear us and can share, we'd be willing to hear. Just okay, Uma, I'm guessing you can't hear us or you're not able to connect to your microphone. Anyway, maybe you can just put in whatever you wanted to in the chat. We also have one question that's come here. Maybe Parth, you can just share what you wanted to, and then we can start addressing some questions that will come up.
yes. No, so I just wanted to say that what we've experienced here is the blatant class bias of the authorities towards the migrant workers. I read one report where they have also bought a 1-year-old puppy back from Uzbekistan which reunited with its owner in Delhi. But here the migrant workers are not being able to get back home. It's just blatant class bias. What we have done is basically robbed them of their dignity, and we have humiliated them at every juncture. It's not like they lived in great conditions before, but at least they worked hard for their meals. They sent money back home. Now we have reduced them to, I mean, they have to depend on charity even for a meal a day, and that is, I think, a horrible feeling to live with.
Yeah. Okay. So Uma sent a message saying she can't hear us. I mean, we can't hear her. Uma, maybe you can just type there as well, and we'll. Okay. So there's one question that's come up till now in the chats, looking at the media. So it says media reports regarding health infrastructure in Mumbai indicating some scary things to anticipate. How do you think these reports rightly indicate the reality? Parth, do you want to take that up?
Yeah, I mean, we've had like crisis of health infrastructure for a while, and these reports are rightly indicating. Yeah, I mean they are. I mean probably it's going to get tougher in Mumbai. So I think yes, I think these reports are rightly indicating the reality, because I mean if you look at the conditions of the government hospitals here and the private public-private partnership, that's not really working out that well. It is getting alarming, I think. Yes.
Okay. So Shishir, you had raised a question about the governance, and I think that's very important, because somehow local self-governance is not something that has been implemented in any of the large cities. But somehow this pandemic is showing us that governance is really the core aspect to handling crisis like this. So I mean, in a more holistic way. So I mean, given that you've been involved with different organizations working on governance issues in Bombay, how do you think, and what do you think is a couple of things that we can do post this, if we actually to learn how to manage our cities better and manage situations like this better? What is the change in governance that is needed?
I think one is, as something which I shared a few minutes ago, was that we've got too many organizations running a city. So and then which leads to absence of transparency and definitely lack of accountability. Something as we say, let's say a committee is set up to find out what happened on the migrant travel. Somebody is going to say, travel is a center issue. Then somebody say, लेकिन वो तो हमने उसका कर दिया था इंतजाम, और वो स्टेट गवर्नमेंट से अभी परमिशन आना बाकी रह गया था. BMC was supposed to do this area, MMRD was supposed to do that area, and people like us will only keep funding and nodding heads to say, okay, I now wonder whom do we talk to. Food is the same issue. Similarly, transport becomes the same issue, and nobody has answers, because everybody loves to then pass the buck, because genuinely that's how the process has been. What is required and needed right now is to create. There was a long time back, not really, about 4 years ago, an issue about discussion about having a CEO for Mumbai. While I'm not saying CEO per se, you're creating a 19th body, but at least somewhere you start building in the official channel into a position of authority who can be on and above. We have the MMRDA, and Uma has had fantastic experience there. The commissioner MMRDA is a overall head of the entire region. And he is senior enough to lord over decisions of everybody else. But then we have political decisions coming in, interferences coming in. So can we have a structure which is something like that? That could be one. Or we create what we had in one of my earlier avatars, we had helped set up a war room for the government. Can we have a war room for the MMR which is functional, which looks at key issues on a common platform and then starts taking them up? So it's not 10 different people making 10 different decisions and each completely non-aligned to the other, but a central war room looking at everything else, and then decentralized at different level. Accountability and transparency, which is completely lacking. There was a report on transparency which the previous government had asked a 3-member panel to put together. A great report has been put together, which is now lying By the same government decided not to table it because they found it was far too embarrassing, and their motto was transparency and accountability. So, these things need to come out, and people like us need to raise these issues more often now.
Okay, so Uma's actually put down some of her thoughts in the question section. I'll just read it out. She says, "I'm a spatial planner primarily, so I find the issue as the prevailing inequality in terms of what we offered as space to the poor as well as amenities, including healthcare. Planning has to go back to the good old system of keeping public health and housing at the core." That's extremely true, Uma ji, and I mean, more planners should be speaking this language post the pandemic, definitely. I mean, we wish you could have spoken, but yes, going back to the basics of planning is really what is needed at this time. And also, how do we de-link land from planning agendas? Because really, land prices in Mumbai and the metropolitan region is what often determines planning decisions. I mean, you would know that better, but is that something that can change? Can builder lobby interests be handled? Can things like that sort of support the local economy and as well as taxes, etc.? How can we handle that? And then of course I'm guessing it will be much easier to go back to planning principles of equality and housing, etc. So we have a few more questions. I'll take it from the top.
Maria, just to add here that we've never really valued planners. For us, it's a city which has always been so reactive. It's never been proactive. So, and then that also links to the same governance issue. What do the moment planners come in, they'll put together, look at a 360 approach. They'll look at how things. We talk about the simple metro and transport also. That okay, what are the things that need to be done? These things need to be aligned with XYZ and stuff like that. But then the state or the administration or the elected representatives, they see planners as a hindrance to their entire vote bank. अगर आप प्लानिंग करोगे ये 6 साल में ये सब अगर करवा रहे हो तो इसमें हमको इंटरेस्ट नहीं, we need some action right now. That's how things work. So planners don't are of no value, and which is the saddest planning.
So we have a question from Rajendra Bhise. He says मुंबई को महामारी को निपटने के लिए भागीदारी बढ़ाने के लिए केरला मॉडल से क्या सीख कर सरकार ने क्या निर्णय करके okay, I don't know. Basically, I think he's asking about to sort of deal with the pandemic. How can we have people's participation, something like what has been done in the Kerala model, and that links to what you were talking about earlier, Shishir, of how we need to have a more robust governance system in the region. Okay, do any one of you all want to answer this? There's another question for Shishir that says, at present, migrant workers are moving towards their native place. What effect will it bring to industries, business, and economy of Mumbai? Share your thoughts.
It's for me.
Yeah. Then I'll just take all the questions and then maybe
sure.
the panelists can pick it up.
Sure.
And Nitin says, in this epidemic, the slum was an obstacle in the prevention of the epidemic due to its high density, which used to be the focal point. While giving news to the media, what is the analysis? What will be the impact in terms of slum policies? Okay, so what will be the impact in terms of slum policies? That is an important and interesting question. We have Avni Kashyap who's saying there have been demands in Panvel and Navi Mumbai of restricting the frontline essential workers of these regions working in Mumbai to Mumbai itself. Daily, approximately half the cases are such cases. Heartbreaking as it is, as a policy question, what do you think about it? Okay. Rajendra Bhise is again saying महाराष्ट्र के ग्रामीण क्षेत्र में लोग सरकारी यंत्रणाओं के साथ मिलकर काम कर रहे हैं, लेकिन शहरों में ये स्थिति नहीं दिख रही है. Yeah, okay, so that's again a governance related question. Aryan is saying, do you guys have any hopes that the public healthcare system might be invested in after this pandemic? I think Kamayani, you should definitely answer this. Now that 80% of the private hospitals have also been taken over. Okay, so these were all the questions.
I would just say, this is the opportunity. We can't miss this bus. We have to strengthen our public healthcare system if we all have to survive, number one. And, this whole, I think the nationalization, the way it has happened in Spain and in other countries, I mean, it has to happen. Access to what we have been fighting is कि हर किसी को अपने स्वास्थ्य का अधिकार है. There should be an affordable, accessible and qualitative health care for everybody. That is a basic right which we are still following. You know, in various countries, you actually have a law made and a policy. Ours is the only country which had a policy, a health policy, which was again very anti-poor, and we have fought for the law which has come as Clinical Establishments Act, जो कानून भी आया है, but that also has been, you know, in the favor of the medical professionals, because we are always at the loggerheads with the Medical Association of India, you know, and how they are fighting. So पब्लिक हेल्थ केयर सिस्टम को तो करना ही, और जैसे आपने एक ने कहा कि गांव के एरिया में जो नेशनल रूरल हेल्थ मिशन है उसमें जन स्वास्थ्य अभियान भी जुड़ा हुआ है, और वहां पे वो रूरल एरिया में बहुत अच्छी तरह काम कर रहे हैं, पंचायत लेवल पे भी काम हो रहा है. तो ये यहाँ पे अर्बन एरिया में क्यों नहीं हो रहा है? You know, this is one thing I think we need to find, that why NRHM successfully has worked in the rural areas, but in urban areas उसका एक ये कारण भी है कि नेशनल अर्बन हेल्थ मिशन फिर उन्होंने डीप फ्रीजर में रख दिया है. उससे हम कितनी बार उनको बोल चुके हैं कि इसके ऊपर भी काम करना चाहिए, बट वो नहीं हो रहा. तो पॉलिटिकल विल होना बहुत जरूरी है, और इसीलिए सरकार को, एज शिशिर इज आल्सो सेइंग, accountability, transparency. I mean, we have to make our government accountable for that.
I could add one quick point here, Marina and Kamini, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you know, on the healthcare infrastructure, what's simply required, and now the government may realize, and people would realize, and that will come in because corporates will realize this, because what's happening, their workforce, businesses have got impacted, and we all know that. Gradually and very gradually, businesses will be forced to start working. And while Mumbai is a red zone, there are other districts where once workers start coming in, because you need to start businesses, you need to have employment, you need to get people back to work, and it's an entire circle. But to ensure that people come back, they need to reinforce faith in those people, and that faith will come in. People will be worried, am I safe? Now, that's where the public-private people partnership on healthcare needs to be thought through, that in every district, if we get the private sector engaged with the government and look at building a proper medical infrastructure in that district where there is available quarantine or safety network available, healthcare facilities available, so that it's in the interest of the private sector to do something like this, because their businesses will be back on track. So every MIDC, the Industrial Development Corporation of every district, gets together, creates a proper solid infrastructure where private sector will help out, the government will help out, the people will feel happier, and gradually we have infrastructure in place. Otherwise, things will languish, people will suffer, and we'll have crisis after crisis in districts. The other part is, out of sight is out of mind. You know, I've always said in a much lighter vein, but an example of Mumbai, and it's an example which works in every city. You know, there's a civil lines in every area, in every city, and the civil lines of that area is where the Babus live. You know, the Malaba Hill and the Kulabas and the Cuff Parades is where the key bureaucrats live. So how often do they really get to travel to pockets where attention is really needed? You have South Mumbai, there's something called footpaths. I don't know whether they exist or it's in museums right now. You know, footpaths exist in some part of Bombay. I remember Ajay Mehta, when the municipal commissioner, said that he spoke about the pitiable condition of footpaths in Bombay when a family member from his family stumbled on one of the footpaths. That's when he realized that footpaths need attention. Can we start having maybe the commissioners living in Kandivali, the other additional commissioners living in Charkop and Nalasopara and traveling to work every day, and then they realize that what the condition of the city is and how 95% of the city really makes its way and makes its living. Till the time they don't see it, it doesn't bother most people that, okay, there's a solution that's required.
Okay. There was a question on how this will impact slum policies in the future. Do any of the panelists want to take this up, or I mean, this is definitely a question that people need to be asking, because everyone is currently really concerned about the way the disease is spreading in Dharavi and what it might mean for other slum areas as well. So, I mean, one knows that the Slum Rehabilitation Act and the way slums have been treated in terms of a redevelopment perspective also, it's not like the densities are decreasing. So does anyone have anything to say about this? Uma's also making quite a few comments in the chat box. Uma says entitlement-based planning and regional spread of economic opportunities will have to follow now. If migrants wish to stay where they want, government has to support it by extending all SOPs to agriculture and locating industries near but sufficiently away from their settlements. This will give them a chance to get back to agriculture, find industrial jobs. Uh, right to bazaar kind of facilities near small towns will help them eliminate middlemen. Huge investments in transportation and TOD should be reviewed. Okay, I'd be interested in knowing from why you're saying that. Is it from? I mean, that investment should be sort of diverted elsewhere, or you're saying that too much is being spent there? There again, and then someone is saying there have been demands in. Okay, no, this is 1 second. Just give me a minute. Let me go down. Romanticization of poverty and slums will hopefully be over. That's also coming from Uma. So does anyone, okay, she's also saying the investment should be diverted to housing and public health. Yes, and what kind of housing and public health care, especially what kind of housing, right, is something that one needs to be asking. So does anyone want to say anything about the changing slum policies and the Kerala model, Shishir, since you're making a case for governance that involves the private sector as well? The Kerala model is one that has been very reliant on the 74th and 73rd Amendment Act in different areas. So, what do you say? We have existing laws, but do you think they need to be reviewed or they need to be implemented?
I feel the public-private partnership, I mean, it has to be in the favor of the public. When we say private, we have the Ambanis and Tata and all the CSR will all go into health infrastructure. But the problem is, with the private sector, it is always profit in mind. No? It is not the people. So will the private sector now put people ahead of profits? Will they? If they put that, then only we can actually think of anything doing together. But that doesn't happen with the private sector. That's an issue. In fact, it was the first time a business tycoon, Azim Premji, he wrote an ET and, saying that this is not the way to treat our migrant workers for the profit. Now, I'm just wondering, within all these big MNCs and all, is there anything churning happening? Are they going to change their policies to be more people friendly? Only then it can happen. Otherwise, we can create infrastructure, but what about the human resources? What about the functioning? What about the profits? I mean, this all has to be thought about how we are going to go ahead with it.
Yes. There are a few more questions that have come in. Actually, their questions are coming in on both the chat and the question box. So just trying to keep that going. Someone is saying, Millie Shetty, finally, who's answerable to all this mess? And compared to other nations, India has at least budget for healthcare and infrastructure. Our taxes need to be diverted for medical and not unwanted developments. Footpaths are for hawkers and not for public. Okay. Well, someone has already answered some of these questions from the team. Okay, let me just check the chat box to see whether our questions are all answered there. So Uma saying the investment should be diverted to housing and public health care, the slum issue. So that question that was asked, basic minimum standards of housing units must be guaranteed, but not delivered through the private sector. Public sector role in housing the poor should be much higher. Wow, yes, that's very true. But do you see that happen in the near future? I mean, I think that would be one of the great things that comes out of the pandemic, is if the government starts their investment and stops being a facilitator and actually a generator of housing. We are working on all the changes in policy and planning that needs to change. Wow, that's really hopeful to hear. So glad that you were part of this webinar and could give us some of the updates that are happening on behalf of the MMRD at this point of time. Okay, so we have another 10 minutes. Do any of the speakers want to take up any of the issues that have been raised? A couple of things that maybe you all want to share that you all hadn't shared earlier, or anything else? Okay, there's a question for Parth. A while ago, unfortunately, some reporters tested positive for COVID in Mumbai. How have reporters been minimizing this risk? Thanks for your reporting. Yes, that is true. Well, there was a lot of news about this earlier. No, you're not. No, we can't hear you.
Yeah. Now I should be
Yeah.
audible now.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. No. So I think 160 odd journalists had tested in the first camp, and 53 of them were tested positive. In the second camp, I also got tested, but thankfully I was negative. So I guess, I mean, reporters are doing what they can, but to be honest, the media owners and their employers are not taking care of them the way they should. We are doing what we can, wearing gloves, masks, and face shield, and going around. There was just one point I just wanted to make about how this will affect the businesses with migrant workers going back. I think uh, if many of the employers and businessmen are going to be hamstrung by this reverse migration, then sorry to say, but I think they deserve being hamstrung, because we have not looked after our migrant workers. We have used them as bonded laborers for a long time, and it's high time we realize that we need to treat them better. And secondly, I mean, to be honest, I think they don't have an option but to come back. They will come back because we have taken away their livelihoods back home a while ago. So they have absolutely no option but to return to cities once things settle down. When you talk to them now, they'll say that they won't come back for a while, and but once things settle down, they'll realize that they don't have enough work back home. So if you just look at the census between 1991 and 2011, nearly 15 million farmers have stopped being main cultivators and become agricultural laborers. So basically, the number of farmers who used to employ agricultural laborers have gone down, and the number of agricultural laborers who depended on other people's farmlands they've exploded. So you have that mismatch, and that's why you have this exodus from rural to urban, and that we have not addressed at all, because as I said, it has ensured cheap labor for rich people in cities. So going forward, even though after everything settles down, I feel because they have no option back home, they would be compelled to come back. So if we want to sort of even out that equation between rural India and urban India, because right now it seems like the rural population is at the mercy of their urban employers. So if we want to balance that equation, we need to invest more in rural economy, and that's the only way we should be going forward. Because right now the collapsing rural economy is a nightmare.
Right. Yeah, that is very true. I mean, we can't just be seeing this as an urban issue. It is very much a rural issue, and that rural-urban continuum is something that really needs to be brought back to the table. So we are
Yes.
almost nearing the end of the webinar. And in fact, I just got a few messages saying that not a lot of people could hear the introduction of why we've organized this webinar series. Was that true? Did my introduction start 5 minutes into me speaking? Because then I'll just go over maybe some things that we were trying to do and a little bit about the next few webinars that are planned. Was my introduction completely lost? We can't hear you, Shishir.
No, that will depend on the people who joined, right? Your introduction was there, but if people joined late, they did not hear you. So you can go ahead and.
Okay. No,
Yeah, I think when you started your introduction, there were 10 or 13 people had just joined in, and later on the number went up to 40, 45 or something like that. So many people may have missed your introduction, which can't be
Yeah,
your
so you
fault.
can do that.
Okay, but
Yeah.
I think we have 3
Yeah.
minutes left. For the sake of those who joined us late, I'll just go over why we sort of decided to do this webinar series, and really thank you all the panelists, including Uma, who have really contributed to this discussion. So, I mean, we were looking at this being, completing 2 months of the national lockdown. The number of infections are on the rise. Somehow cities are where we are seeing the pandemic spread in a very, alarming rate. And of course, it is exposing the brutality of cities, whether it is for the urban poor or also for everyone sort of as victims of the economic slowdown. And at the same time, cities have always, our cities are largely unplanned. Uma, pardon me for saying that. I know you'll agree with me. But questions of planning, housing, healthcare, densities, etc., are questions that have always been there, but they've been ignored in the larger questions of sort of economic growth for cities, etc., etc. So we wanted to look through this webinar series. Actually, we're looking at what are the challenges being faced by the poor that's been brought out through the migrant crisis, those living in informal settlements, etc. Look at what practices and governance are emerging. That's something Shishir also spoke about. And what are the changes in cities that need to be made post-COVID? And I'm really glad, Uma, you could tell us about the changes that the MMRD is working on, looking at how the public sector can invest more in housing. So day after, since this is part of a series, and we started with the Mumbai metropolitan region, day after we're having a webinar that looks at the Bhopal Indore region and what's happening there with the pandemic. On the 30th, we have a webinar focused on Chennai. After that, in Nagpur, then Patna, Gaya, and then after that, we'll be updating our social media. Okay, Uma saying she's not speaking as MMRDA, she's speaking for planning professionals. Sure, noted. Okay, so I think we could maybe end now. Does anyone have any final comments? No? Okay. So thank you all. Thank you, panelists, so much for agreeing to be part of this webinar. We will be doing another one when we release our report on the situation in the MMR, and then maybe, Uma, we can have you officially as a speaker as well. So thank you so much, Shishir and Parth and Kamayani, and thanks for all the amazing work that you all have been doing during the last 2 months. Really, we need to give each other hope at this time. Anyway, thank you all so much, and see you all at the next webinar.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.